Okay, everybody. Uh, Here we are again. This is our second educative seminar with the Australian Economics Olympiad. It's Saturday, the 27th of April. I am your host, Justin Burley, a high school economics teacher from Brisbane in Queensland. Our special guest today is Tom Houlden. Tom Houlden, very excited to speak with you today. Tom, for everybody who may be unaware, Tom holds a predoctoral research fellowship in economics at the University of Oxford, where he applies economic principles to analyze global priorities related to risk and emerging technologies. After completing his Bachelor of Economics with honors and Bachelor of Arts at the University of New South Wales in 2021, he joined the Commonwealth Treasury as a policy analyst, contributing to the development of consumer data policies. Tom is planning on pursuing graduate studies in economics beginning later this year. Thanks very much. Welcome, Tom. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It's great to be here.
Good, good. Just before we kind of get into our interview, for those who may be joining us in the audience and for those who might be watching later on YouTube, we run these free educative seminars for all high school students, even those who are not participating in this year's Economics Olympiad. The whole aim or the goal with the Economics Olympiad is to try to sort of make best advantage of the large and growing number of students who have an increasing interest in economics at a high school level, and trying to kind of give them a little bit of a taste about what the field may be like should they choose it as a career or academic, or obviously a merger of both, that type of future pathway. So Tom, I suppose, again, thanks for joining us. Maybe we should get right into it. Can you we spoke a little while ago, and you did sort of make a point of having a little bit of a non-traditional pathway to the field of economics. I'm sure we will get into, your journey and how you ended up where you are right now. But can we start with where you are right now? Can you tell us a little bit about what you're studying, where you're studying, the type of work that you're doing? Yeah, and we'll start there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, so as Justin kind of outlined a little bit earlier, I'm currently holding a research fellowship over at Oxford. And my main focus has generally been around what you might call the economics of what might be really important. And I think this kind of stands in contrast a little bit to more traditional pathways of the kind of economics of what's generally very useful. And so things that I would kind of put in this class, the economics of kind of transport or monetary policy or fiscal policy, these kinds of things. But the thing that kind of really attracted me to economics was something a little bit more speculative, and being able to kind of use economics as a tool for really understanding key kind of global priorities. And kind of big questions, I suppose. And so while I've kind of been in this role, I've had a great opportunity to really take on a whole bunch of research that, I think is pretty important. And as you say, I've kind of been mostly focused around kind of risks and emerging technologies and just generally big decisions. Now, this all sounds kind of lofty, but I think the nice thing is that there's at least something that economics can kind of say about this kind of stuff. And so specific examples of the kind of things I'm interested in. So at the moment, I'm kind of working on a project related to irreversible decision making. And this comes out of this kind of thought, I guess, that, we have policymakers who get to make big decisions, and at least some of these decisions seem to be irreversible. So, as an example, we have these kinds of tipping points in climate change. And once ice caps are melted, it kind of seems difficult to kind of freeze them back together. Or once a kind of forest is cut down, it seems a little bit difficult to kind of plant those, or at least takes a very long time and a lot of resources to kind of reverse the effects of these things. And I kind of came at this from a release of like a risky technology perspective. So kind of classic example of this was like the development of a nuclear weapon. Once we kind of had this technology, we couldn't kind of put the genie back in the bottle. And so then the thing that really interests me about this is that we also seem to have kind of policymakers who just kind of have idiosyncratic views. And sometimes they're even quite extreme. And there's this kind of concerning thing that if we have policymakers with very extreme views and they're also able to make irreversible decisions, then it seems quite concerning that we might be able to have policymakers that really lock in policies or outcomes that kind of can't easily be reversed. So the kind of thing I'm focused on with this is thinking about what are the incentives for, well, what should we do now, for example, if, say, in 20 years that we knew that we were going to have like a very extreme policymaker come into power? And how does this affect kind of policymaker incentives? And also, like, what should us, the voters, kind of do about this? So this is like one of my main research interests at the moment. I'm also thinking quite a lot about the development and deployment of kind of really advanced AI systems that could really boost economic growth in some meaningful way, but also may pose kind of risks in doing so. That there's a kind of increasing conversation about the risks associated with advanced AI. So I've been trying to think a bit more about this as well.
Oh, wow, fascinating. I am glad that you mentioned AI, if only because that was the first, that would have been my first guess as to an example of a current and a recent emerging technology. And it is very good to see that there does hopefully seem to be a lot of smart minds who are trying to prepare for it with perhaps a little bit more attention than we might have prepared for previous brand new technologies. Can I ask a little bit, with your research and the irreversible decision? I'm fascinated by that. I can speak, at least from the high school teaching perspective, that most curricula would have, dedicated syllabus time to ecological sustainable development and things like that, but not so much with the angle of these decisions that get made to clear land are irreversible. So I suppose my question, without too much rambling, is, in your experience or in your research, would the irreversibility, the fact that we may not get these natural resources back, even from a very cold, we use natural resources for economic benefit, the idea that we might not get them back, or we might not get them back for generations, is it accurate to say that that might not have been calculated or incorporated in these original models?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an intimate knowledge of how these kind of, so for example, I think one of the main, some of the kind of main models that evaluate climate damages, I think do tie in a few of these kind of tipping points, but I don't have a great knowledge of this. But maybe I could say that, when it comes to irreversible decisions, we have to come up with some more interesting methods, we have to get a little bit creative about how we think about these problems. So I can give you a kind of intuition here, which is that, let's say we're unsure about the consequences of a decision, and once we make this decision, we kind of can't take it back. Now, the wrong way about going about this decision is just like, at this time, let's just think about the expected value of this decision. If it's good, if it's positive, then we should make that decision. If it's negative, we should not. But what this kind of leaves out is the ability to kind of say, okay, let's just hold on a second. We should do a little bit of research now, and we can maybe decide again in the next period if our views change. And so this is what we call option value, the kind of holding off on making decisions for some period in order to kind of accumulate information before kind of making them later. So we do have to get a little bit creative about thinking about these decisions.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I should say as well to the audience, to the listening audience, like last time, there will be a period of Q&A. If anybody out there does have, just feel free to fire them into the chat. And we're happy to forward those questions on. For my next question, this one might be an obvious one, but what brought you to Oxford? Why Oxford? If there is any other reason other than, well, it's Oxford, have you ever heard of it? Why there?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason I kind of came here was, so maybe we can get a bit more into this shortly, but I was, for a while, I didn't well, I came to economics quite late. And before coming to economics, I actually really wanted to be an academic philosopher. And so when I first started university, I was studying philosophy, and I was kind of always interested in questions at the kind of intersection of philosophy and economics. Things like, what kind of, what can we, how do we, for example, put a value on life? What's the kind of value of future lives? These are all kind of policy relevant questions that feel quite philosophical, and I don't think economists generally have the tools to think about this too carefully, but they at least have the frameworks, I suppose. But anyway, so this is all to say that I came here because there's a kind of great research institute that's kind of at the end, hires economists and philosophers, called the Global Priorities Institute, which is where I work, which is really essentially focused on the kind of foundational questions that we would like to answer if we were, say, giving advice to a government or like a very rich philanthropist or something like this. What are the kind of foundational questions? So so I kind of came here because I was interested in both philosophy and economics, and just felt like a natural fit. And I guess that's why I ended up here. And I also just quite like Oxford as a place now. So
Excellent. How long have you been there?
about 2 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So in your 2 years, has there, I know this is a very much on the spot question, but is there something, I'm not sure if surprising is the right word, but is there a type of research? I don't mean about the lifestyle there or anything like that, but if something jumps out, feel free. But is there a piece of research or a global priority question or a problem that when you got there and you met the type of people who push towards those things have sort of like knocked your hair back academically, so to speak, like, oh wow, that is a fascinating thing that I haven't thought about before, or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to pick.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. It's just so I think there's been quite a lot of this. I think like I have generally been kind of pushed in directions. Yeah, I've been kind of inspired by, I think, some relatively simple stuff. So when I finished undergrad, I was like, maybe I was kind of interested in these big questions, and one thing that kind of happened recently was kind of COVID, and there was all this debate about how we should value lives during COVID, and like what's the optimal policy response. And there was just a lot of people had different views about this. And I thought maybe I could be a kind of economist that's really focused on pandemics and catastrophes in this sense, because there seems to be like a lot of interesting discussion here. But once I kind of came here, I did quite quickly get the sense that these kinds of conversations is relevant to many decisions that we face as policymakers. And I was particularly excited by some work on basically trying to really highlight what are the foundational questions we would like to ask when we kind of are trading off between interventions that kind of might have really bad downsides, but also really high upsides. Like what are the really essential things we're looking at? And there was this one paper by an economist called Chad Jones, which I was particularly excited about on this trade-off with respect to AI, which is why one of the reasons I'm kind of focused on this now a little bit. And what he kind of highlighted was what really seems to be the key question when it comes to making this trade-off is how quickly does our kind of individual utility diminish as we become richer. He really showed that this was just a key thing, and it was quite fascinating to me because he was able to show this in quite a simple way, but it does feel like somewhat detached. Like if you're asking someone off the street, like what kinds of things would really determine like how willing we'd be to deploy risky technologies. It's not like this immediately jumps to mind. But he was able to really show that this is just a key kind of policy question and something that we're also kind of uncertain about as well.
Fascinating. I did just a few days ago, sometime last week, read an article. I can't remember where or what the context was, but they were making the point. It was about life satisfaction and fulfillment in relation to people's annual salary or income. And it was kind of comparing, do people keep getting happier as they make more money? Or, and interesting, and interesting to me, the finding was that, like, I think it was in the American context because it was in US dollars, but I think they said, at least in the United States, according to these surveys, they said that, like, of course, people's happiness and sense of fulfillment and their stress goes down and their happiness goes up as they make more money, but apparently only up to about $75,000-$80,000 a year. And then making 90, making making 100K, making 200K, making 1.7 million, the level of happiness kind of plateaued. And more and more, it made the case that more and more significant pay rises were needed to maintain that level of satisfaction. And its thesis was that it was the social comparison, that once most of your essentials are covered and you have a pretty safe place to live, that what gives you satisfaction is that you're just comparing it to other people. And the difference between someone who makes 100,000 to 80 is going to be pretty big, but the difference between that six-figure earner is going to feel quite small next to someone who makes 150,000 or 400,000, and they're going to feel very, very, very small compared to someone who's a millionaire. Things like that. So I'm not entirely sure how that's like, if that's related, but that idea of like, what are the fundamental questions was really fascinating, and it made me think of that.
Yeah. No, this is very much related, and I think like, a fun kind of I could give you a fun thought experiment.
Excellent.
So, my question is: so let's say that we can attach a number which states, how good a person's life is going. Whether this be kind of life satisfaction, well, maybe actually life satisfaction isn't going to work here, but in economics we normally call this just a utility. So, and standard kind of assumptions in economics are that utility might be a function of like consumption, maybe leisure, stuff like this. But anyway, these are some concerns aside. And so one question is like, let's suppose we gave someone infinite consumption with this number that we attach to. Or infinite leisure or something, or I mean, I don't even know what infinite leisure would look like, but infinite consumption still kind of works. And a kind of foundational question is, what happens to our utility once this person has kind of infinite consumption? Does this utility kind of go to infinity, or does it kind of plateau at some fixed number? And this is so. Just get like a little technical here, like, some kind of economists, when they're doing research, like to assume log utility, which means that, this kind of utility follows a log form and diminishes as we become richer, but diminishes in a way that means that if you gave this person infinite consumption, their utility would be infinite. And so you can kind of see here that, you can still assume kind of diminishing returns, but but an interesting question is whether these diminishing returns approach some kind of bounded level over time. And you can see, like, when we're talking about, for example, AI that could dramatically increase growth, it makes a big difference whether, like, if we deploy this AI, then in 1,000 years, if we enjoy like 10% growth of something like this, we're going to be incredibly rich. And so whether these kind of utility functions are kind of bounded in some way, that is, like, we can only ever get so much better, or they're unbounded, in which we can kind of get infinitely better if we have kind of access to infinite kind of consumption, then this is just a really like essential modeling question.
Excellent. Fascinating stuff. I love the philosophy angle of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we try to sell it. Sell the subject to high school students, that it's like, it's a way that your mind works. It's the way that you see the world, that there's, the root of the economic problem is scarcity, is unlimited wants and limited resources. I've never really thought to think of, okay, like, let's just reimagine that. What would it look like if we still have unlimited wants, but we had unlimited resources? Would that be better? Perhaps, though, we should scale it back to like more practical, down to earth type of things. Can you speak? I'm from Queensland. You're from New South Wales. Can can you speak to us a little bit about what it is like to study economics at University of New South Wales? Any like work internships? There's like students crossing the borders becoming more and more important. I would imagine that there's more students from Queensland going to New South Wales and Victoria than there are coming up. So can you kind of speak to any of those who might be thinking about that as well?
Yeah, great. Well, I should clarify. I was actually one of the students that did cross the border. I was
Ah,
originally brought. I went high school in Victoria,
mm,
um, but yeah, I kind of went to Sydney. Uh, well, yeah. So I initially chose to go there because I was studying something slightly different, which they kind of were only offering there. But I ended up changing into economics. But my time at UNSW was, great. I can speak to it very highly. I kind of enjoy Sydney as a place. I enjoy the kind of um, location of this university, and but I think like I guess at many universities you really kind of just get out what you put in. I think, and I guess I'm speaking to kind of enthusiastic high school students who really might be able to put in quite a lot, and in this case, I think you can really get rewarded for putting in this stuff. And there's just like many different things you can kind of go all in on, I would say. So yeah, for me, this felt like a lot of kind of academic stuff, and there was just plenty of opportunities to really be quite involved with some of the work that economists were doing at UNSW. For example, like I spent one summer taking on a research project on the economics of productivity of the higher education system in Australia, which I just learned quite a lot during this time. I think this was in my third year. And prior to this, I also spent time doing some research system work with academics at the university. And basically, it just felt like a great opportunity to really be involved quite a lot with the kind of goings on of kind of work at universities. And so I think where anyone ends up, there's always plenty of opportunity to do this. Yeah.
excellent, excellent. And you sort of alluded to it before, but why did you end up taking that winding journey towards economics? Why did you decide to pursue it as a pathway? Was I get the impression that it wasn't during high school. It might not even have been after high school. It might have come, a few years after. Can you kind of speak to what originally drew you to economics?
Yeah. So I could start off by saying I think I went to one high school class in economics
Hmm.
and I dropped it the next day. I think I walked in and my teacher was talking about monetary policy or something like this. I was like, this is not what I'm interested in at all. Um, and yeah, so as I kind of suggested, as a high school student, I was mostly interested in philosophy, and when I first started university, I was doing philosophy and neuroscience. Um, and I really enjoyed these, but I think one thing that kind of, there was a bit of a moment. Perhaps there was a sequence of moments, but one thing that feels particularly important. Was that I remember reading I was reading the Stern report on climate change, which is this kind of big text by an economist, Nicholas Stern, basically discussing the social cost of carbon and how he kind of arrives at this. And this was a kind of very early contribution to this work. I think this report came out in 2006 or something like this. And one thing that kind of came out of this report was this finding, or at least debate, that that you can kind of come up with a number for social cost of carbon, but what really is important, and you can just change this number, but quite a lot based on how you calibrate this kind of one parameter, was how much you value, or the discount rate, what we call the discount rate on future lives, which is basically, how much is a life worth of someone today versus someone in 100 years, something like this. And this just felt like very philosophical. Economists like to think that they can come up with this number by looking at market decisions, but I'm not a huge fan of this approach. And really, like it feels like we're making kind of normative trade-offs here. And so I kind of looked at this as someone doing philosophy and was like, oh, this is cool. Like here's a whole bunch of economists doing philosophical stuff. And so I kind of became interested in economics after reading this, I think. And the more I was kind of reading it, the more I appreciated the fact that economists are just a very pragmatic bunch. And I like to think that I'm quite pragmatic, and I'm interested in policy. Um, and economics just felt like a kind of right home for me to try and do this kind of
Hmm.
stuff. So yeah, I think in my maybe in like my third year of university, yeah, I think maybe late in my second year of university, I took my first economics class. So I was very lucky to be able to kind of switch into doing this. And yeah, I guess I never looked back.
Excellent. That first university economics class, was that a different experience then from the high school one? If
Yeah,
maybe I
yeah,
would assume that the topics and what was being discussed
mm,
wouldn't have been that different, but perhaps it was just
no.
your outlook on things, appreciating it in a different way.
Yeah, I think it's that. So I think I walked into my high school class and I didn't really know what economics was about. I kind of just heard that it was related to social stuff and it was quantitative, and I was kind of quantitative and I'm interested in social stuff. So I was like, yeah, let's see what this is like. Um, but yeah, and I was kind of not that impressed when I did high school, but I'm sure many people doing like yeah, any people listening to this, I'm sure very enthusiastic about economics and have a great sense of what the field's about. Um, but then when I kind of went back in university, you're right, like the content was quite similar. Um, but I think I had this kind of perspective that it's like, oh,
Mm.
look, like I can see the kind of cool work that economists can do, and it's like I want to do that. And yeah, if it means kind of talking about interest rates, then that's what it takes.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
I think that's a natural sort of bridge to our next question. If you had to not necessarily give advice to a young person who's trying to decide their career or whatever, but like what type of young person, what type of, I would assume that in university you would have been a TA, would have maybe worked with first year university students. So would you be able to kind of describe like, oh, here's a 17-year-old, here's an 18-year-old, this should be the place for them based on their outlook, the way that they think, what they're interested in, what type of young person would feel at home pursuing a career in economics?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that it feels like as I mentioned before, it feels like quite a pragmatic discipline, and I feel like this is kind of baked into um, the discipline. And what I mean by pragmatic here is just uh, you know, we're the willingness to recognize, we're uncertain about things. We don't really know how they work, and the world's like a complicated place.
Mm.
But we can kind of study what's going on and try and make good guesses at like how we should behave based on, and we can write down some models and they're going to tell us a little bit about how people tend to behave, and this kind of thing. And but who knows? So yeah, I think kind of being comfortable and interested and almost like arrogant enough to like try and write down these models just feels like a good a good trait for economists, to be honest. And also just like I think kind of going hand in hand with this, just willingness to be critical, um, because the foundation of economics is generally like mathematical models, but of generally like of behavior.
Mm.
And like I don't really know if people think in these terms, like if this is really the best way to describe behavior, but it's useful, and it gives us traction on problems. So being kind of critical of these foundations, I think is useful, and then maybe finally just quantitative as well. I should say that like when I first decided to start doing more economics. Like I didn't do the hardest math in high school. I didn't do economics in high school. I'd only done a tiny bit of quantitative stuff before that. But it is like I was kind of worse off for it. Like it is quite a quantitative discipline, and these are quite useful skills. Mm.
Excellent, excellent. We might pivot a little bit. I do have some questions previously that were sent through, and
Mm.
your mention of maths and the quantitative nature that tends to be a very common number one question with high school students
Mm.
who are thinking of getting into economics. At least that's one of their options. So I
Mhm.
suppose very bluntly, how hard is the maths, and how good do you have to be at maths in order
Yeah.
to do well in university economics and a career in economics as well?
Yeah. I think. Yeah. So there were times where I found it challenging. Um, yeah, again, as someone who didn't take the kind of hardest math in high school, and yeah, I didn't think I was bad at math. I thought I was all right, but I was kind of just more interested in other stuff.
Mm.
So yeah, there were definitely times where I found it tough, and kind of certain parts of economics are much more mathematical than other ones, and especially I guess in kind of if you take economics, you'll probably find that in your kind of last year, you'll probably if you take some kind of advanced macro and micro courses, these will tend to get a little bit mathematical. Um, but yeah, I mean, this also, it was tough, but like it was
It's
doable.
it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely doable, and yeah, I think when I entered the was when I was first considering, I was quite nervous about this, and I now would go back and tell myself in my second year of university, yeah, it's gonna be tough, but don't worry about it too much. Like
Mm.
it'll be interesting,
Yeah.
and you can learn math. That's fine.
Yep. That's pretty much the same. I tell the students as well that I mean, there is maths involved. It's only quantitative, but it's not maths foremost. It's not a math degree. It's not applied mathematics. Um, my mates who are engineers, based on our notes and discussions, engineering has more maths than surprise, surprise. It's not as much maths
Yeah.
as something like engineering,
Mhm.
things like that. A couple of the other questions that I have sitting in front of me are sort of policy, real worldy type of
Mhm.
questions. I do have one that they're just curious if England, if England has a comparable issue with cost of living and particularly house prices and rental prices as Australia does. We would assume the answer would be yes, but can you speak
Mm.
on a little bit about the global cost of living crisis, especially with England?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose I'm now just speaking as someone off the street on this. Don't have
Yeah.
any strong views, but yeah, I mean it's quite expensive living here. I think yeah, Oxford's quite expensive, and also just because you kind of get a lot of people wanting to kind of come over here,
Mm.
um, which obviously makes houses and rent expensive. Um, and yeah, so there's definitely like attractive destinations in the UK, which just make them quite expensive. I think most of the UK has also seen a similar kind of cost of living increase. Yeah, I mean, they call it the Cosy Lizzie, I think. So it's definitely been it's been a thing. Um, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure like how it compares to the Australian kind of cost of living
Mm.
crisis. My hunch would be that it's in the same kind of same ballpark. Yeah.
Fair. Is there much of a difference in not so much economic news, but I guess economic priorities or economic policy um,
Mm,
between where you live now and where you have come from?
mm, mm. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. When so when I was at the Treasury, I was working on kind of data policy, and uh, the UK and the EU. I mean, so the UK kind of in virtue of once being part of the EU, we're really world leaders on this kind of policy, and we uh, actually, and with a lot of kind of technology policy, EU has generally been a world leader. So this has been kind of cool to see. And a lot of the EU and the UK tend to export quite a lot of their policy in this or versions of their policy to places like Australia and the US. So this has been quite interesting to see. In terms of other priorities, I think. Yeah, I mean, I guess this has just been kind of constant for the UK, the US, and Australia, and probably other Western countries as well. That there is just this like kind of cost of living issue, which is really at the forefront, I guess, of economic discussions. Uh, yeah, so I mean, this is all to say. I think there's some differences, but quite a lot of similarities.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I asked that because we were speaking with a Dr. Cameron Murray, whose
Mm,
focus these days and is on housing policy, and he was sort of
mm,
explaining. The question was raised to him: Are different countries handling rent price increases, housing
mm,
policy, differently?
mm,
Whether it's Australian negative gearing or the the portions of commission housing that or social housing that is built, or whether a country has rent caps or things like that. And he basically made the point that yes, of course, different countries are handling their cost of living and their housing crises differently, but they're all kind of still having the same problems. Which, if you're a cynical person, it's easy
Yeah.
to throw your hand up and say, well, it doesn't matter what we do. Rent is going to be incredibly
Yeah.
expensive. But then at the same time, it provides a fascinating, it's more complicated than that. It's more, all of these economic problems are more complicated than like, well, let's just do what they do, and then the problem will go away. And if you speak to the people there, they probably aren't happy with what they're probably unhappy with what their government or their policymakers are doing as well. Could you elaborate a little bit more? You mentioned data policy. What is data policy? That's not something I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I guess I could say we live in a world where we have lots of data floating around, and I guess the question is, how do we handle this? Like, what kind of safety rails do we need to put in place for example, where people to limit like who people give their own data to? Do we need specific kind of regimes so that people can have access to the data that they have, that companies kind of have on them? Yeah, I guess, and also like how should companies kind of treat the data that they have? You know, should they be forced to delete it after a certain time, or should they have like what are the best practices around handling this kind of data? So yeah, this I was working on this for a bit, and it certainly is like a very interesting and like hot area, I guess, and something that kind of we need to figure out. And Australia has some. Yeah, so in Australia we have the kind of consumer data right, which specifies the kind of rights of individuals, and yeah, this feels like a kind of useful and topical kind of issue that I don't have any views on the exact right approaches, but yeah, this is the kind of thing I was working on.
Excellent. Good. All right, I have one more short list of student questions, and they're kind of like the hot economic topic questions, and they're just curious for not necessarily an in-depth, in-depth explanation, but just your off the top of your head, almost like a rapid fire type of thing.
Okay.
The first one is, and I suppose you could answer from the UK perspective, since that's probably what you're more familiar with these days. Do you think there will be a recession this year? Or I guess in the UK's case, will there be another one? Or how long will the recession last?
Yeah, God, okay. I should clarify that like I'm basically not speaking from a point of any expertise on this kind of given my interest. Let's say yes, it seems possible. Maybe more than 50%. Yeah.
Sure, of course. It definitely does seem that inflation is coming down here a fair bit. Although at least in Australia, I think yesterday they released this CPI figure, and it was 4 percentage points lower than it was in the previous quarter, but it was still higher than they thought. So now is the cash rate, our interest rates going to go up, or are they going to go down? Unsure. The other question, the next sort of rapid fire question is are the cost of living problems in the UK, how much of them are largely driven by demand versus supply chain issues?
Okay, yeah, this is an interesting question, and also something that I'm sure someone would have an answer to that I don't. My reaction, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's difficult to my reaction would have been that like any kind of long-term solution for housing issues is just to build more houses. Like at some point you eventually have to like fix the supply side to really make any dent in it. And just from like a small amount of commentary that I've seen, it kind of seems like people are saying that maybe there's demand fixes, but these kind of seem to be all band-aid solutions. So yeah, my reaction would be to say something like I don't know exactly what's causing this kind of issue, but I imagine the kind of solution is building more houses.
Yep. All
Yeah.
right. Yep. Fair enough. And the last one, the last rapid fire question, with AI, what would be not the most, but what is one economic impact, one economic impact that AI will attribute itself to? That's like, this will definitely happen because of AI. It might not be
Mm,
super dramatic and exciting, but we can all count
mm,
5 years from now, 10 years from now, AI's done
mm,
this, and this is different
mm.
now, in terms of economics, at least.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a very good question, and you know, so one thing that I think, let's see. Yeah, so I do expect that it will show up in productivity statistics within the next 5 years,
Hmm.
um, which is a very big claim, I should say.
Hmm.
Given like, famously, the internet didn't really show up in productivity statistics at least that much.
Hmm.
So saying that we do think that this will in quite a short time horizon
Hmm.
uh, is a very big claim. And I guess the avenue through which I think this is possible is probably through some degree of automation,
Hmm.
and but not necessarily automation of jobs, but automation of tasks. And the claim here is that each job contains many tasks, and at least some of these might be automated. And of course, this will naturally also mean that some jobs will likely be automated. But for example, you know, if I have to write a long email, ChatGPT can make writing this long
Hmm.
email somewhat shorter. And so
Yeah.
this is an example of automation of tasks. And yeah, it seems likely enough that people will, at least in the next kind of 5 years, I imagine people will be able to automate more of their own tasks. It's difficult to tell how this is going to have like kind of flow on impacts on unemployment. Um, but yeah, it's a little bit difficult to tell what's kind of happening beyond this horizon.
Hmm.
So some people claim that like, there's just a kind of slow march of automation when it comes to AI. That each year AI is kind of going to be able to automate a kind of continuous or increasing fraction
Hmm.
of jobs. And if this is true, then after some time, you need a pretty interesting economic environment to say that like humans are still actually useful here. Like maybe we have preferences for, I don't know, a kind of human judge or a human police officer. So in this case, maybe it's yeah, I imagine that the world would look very different if humans are kind of limited to quite a narrow range of, maybe there's no like human investment bankers or something, or no human cardiologists or something. I'm not too sure. Um, but yeah, this is all to say that beyond this kind of 5 year horizon, I'm not too sure. But my I'm hedging my bets a little bit. But yeah, this is my guess that things will kind of show up soon through kind of some degree of automation of the
Yeah.
everyday tasks. Yeah.
Yep, yep. Excellent. Okay. One last, and I did send this one to you earlier,
Mm,
just in
mm,
full disclosure to our audience, as our fun,
mm.
thought-provoking question, just to finish
Oh
up.
yeah,
Thanks
yeah.
so much. So if you were the treasurer, if you're actually at the head of the table in terms of designing economic policy and solving social problems,
Mm,
um, not necessarily what do you think is the most important problem. You could
mm,
approach it that way, but more, is there what's the first thing that you would, all right, we need to take care of this,
mm,
even if it's because it's a simple one and that we
mm,
could just sign a few papers, or the other
mhm,
way, it's so important we haven't done enough. What's your first
mm,
priority, first issue or policy that you would look at
mhm.
if you have free reign as the head of the economic yeah.
Yeah, I think yeah, and maybe this is consistent with the kind of theme of me being focused on the economics of things that might be really important. Um, I would say like developing. So there's been some development of like a kind of national kind of risk strategy, um, but I think we need to have like a concrete framework. It would be good for Australia to be able to say, hey, here's a list of really bad things that could happen to Australia. You see these often like floods, fires, this kind of thing. And I want to know how bad these could possibly be. And we, with these kind of catastrophes, like economists used to thinking that these have some kind of tail where it's hard to come up with an expected value because you're not sure how catastrophic the most extreme cases, realizations of these catastrophes could be. But it also means that the kind of expected losses associated with these catastrophes could be quite large. And so this is all to say that I would be most interested in kind of sitting down and saying, okay, how bad do we expect these to be? And how are we putting resources into, well, I expect these kind of calculus to show that these things are much bad, quite bad, and that deserve a lot of attention. And maybe it's not always like sexy to kind of think about catastrophes in the kind of before they happen, like I guess after COVID, like pandemics, but like what are we doing for the next pandemic, I guess is my question. And so there's been some movement towards this, but I think I would just really want to say, what concretely is our like annual budget going to be forever to like ensure that we are as resilient as we possibly can be.
Fascinating. Yes, like I do believe New Zealand, and I think Australia might have started one recently, like a natural disaster relief, like explicitly dedicating a portion to their government, but that we'll set this aside for the next flood, so that way we don't have to, like, no one has to worry about where we're getting the money from it or anything like it. It does sound simple. But obviously much more difficult in practice. But yeah, like a simple little, if this was to happen, this would be our response. Yeah, that definitely does sound worth pursuing or worth thinking about. And to all of our students out there, as kind of is the theme of all of these these educative seminars, is how varied these are. We had a couple of weeks ago, Dr. Murray, who I believe his first issue that he would address was related to superannuation and addressing that. And I'm sure whether it was climate change or catastrophes or inequality or cost of living, there's so many economic problems that are very, very important. Perhaps that's part of the problem, is that there's so many economic problems out there, and all of them are incredibly important.
Yeah.
Well, I think that might be it. Thank you so much, Tom. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. Our students are going to get a lot of thought and a lot of insight from this. Perhaps some encouragement to leave Queensland and go to New South Wales or Victoria, or come back the other way, or head out to WA. Studying outside of their comfort zone, and also I really, you could probably tell from my accent that I'm North America. I'm from Canada originally, and I moved over here in 2008. So I definitely can am akin to the winding career path and traveling overseas, and thinking about life as an expatriate and all of that sort of stuff. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it. Gray, is there any announcements or anything else that you wanted to chime in with before we let Tom enjoy the rest of his Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, no announcements for me. Thank you both. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Justin. That was really insightful, informative, interesting to listen to. It looks like we we can have the opportunity for any questions if anyone from the audience has any questions. Otherwise, we can leave it there.
Excellent.
So yeah, if there are any
seem
questions about the AEO, then let me know.
Yep. It does look like that's it. Nothing else seems to be coming through. Yeah, I suppose, Tom, did you have anything else that you wanted to close on? Any questions or comments, anything like that on your end?
No, just thanks for having me. I always like talking to high school students, mostly just because I think that if someone told me this when I was in high school, this would have been useful information.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah, anyway.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.